Janae with Designs by JuJu. As we approach the beginning of a new school year, we have a free design just for you, a World's Best Teacher mug rug. You can stitch this for a beloved instructor to celebrate a special time in the upcoming school year. If you've never stitched a mug rug with a satin stitch edge, have no fear. We will walk you through the process step by step in this video. This mug rug comes in 5 different sizes. It is completed in 1 hooping, no extra sewing required. Are you ready? Let's get started. Included in your download will be a PDF of instructions, and on page 2 of those instructions you'll find the supply list and the fabric cutting chart. This mug rug comes in 5 sizes, and I will be stitching the 5x7 size, so I used this column to cut my materials. I have hooped 2 layers of water-soluble stabilizer. This is the fabric type that kind of looks like a mesh cutaway. It is not the clear topper type of water-soluble stabilizer. And we hooped 2 layers because it provides a nice support for the satin stitches that finish our project. I've cut a rectangle of batting, and then for this mug rug we need 1 fabric for the top and 1 for the back. I'm going to make my chalkboard black, so I chose this black fabric. I have fused it ahead of time with a layer of SF101 interfacing. That just provides extra stability and support for the stitches. It's not necessarily required, but we prefer it for a nice finished look. You'll need to also select your threads. Included in your download will also be a color chart. The first page has the design image as well as the threads required in the correct sequence. You'll notice that it starts with pink, green, and blue. But there's no pink, green, or blue showing in the final design image. And that's because these are machine steps for tacking down the batting and fabric. At my machine, I will use probably 1 thread color for all 3 of those steps. But it's important that the design file has 3 steps for this part of the design. The second page of the color chart will show the sequence of steps. So we're going to start with batting placement, batting tack down, and fabric tack down. Then this step's probably hard to see because it's in white thread, but it will be the text on the chalkboard. We've got the eraser, the top of the eraser, a little piece of chalk. Then we'll tack down the batting and do the satin stitches around the edge. I have my white thread selected for the text and the chalk. Since my chalkboard is going to be black, I'm actually going to use a dark gray for my eraser so that it shows up. In this sample where I use green fabric, black thread for the eraser is just fine. And then I have 2 different browns, 1 for the top of the eraser and 1 for the satin stitch edges. One final comment, because the product is finished with satin stitches, some people prefer to use matching thread in their bobbin for the final step. And so if you want to do that, you'd want to wind that before starting this project. At the end of my demonstration, I will show you 2 different samples, one with colored bobbin and one with regular white, so you can see the difference. All right, let's head to the embroidery machine. The first design step is the placement line for the batting. I have loaded black thread so that you can see it well on my stabilizer. So we'll hit start. Once the placement line has stitched, I'm going to lay my rectangle of batting over this placement line, making sure that the batting extends beyond all 4 sides, and then we will tack this down. At this point, we're going to remove the hoop from the machine. We are not going to unhoop our project, we're just going to take it off and head over to the cutting counter. The next step is to trim out the batting, so just use a pair of little applique scissors or whatever you would like to trim around the perimeter of the batting. You want to get as close as you can without snipping the stitches. Alright, our next step is going to be tacking down the black fabric. So while I'm standing here, I'm going to go ahead and lay down the fabric that has SF101 on the back over the batting, and then I will return to my machine to tack it down. For the tack down step, I often like to use a matching thread color, and so I'm going to stick with my black. at this point you have a choice. I'm going to go ahead and remove my hoop and trim the top fabric around, but you could choose to wait until the end and trim the top fabric and the back fabric at the same time. Just like the batting, we need to trim out this fabric, cutting as close as we can to the tack down line. Now that the fabric is trimmed out, we're going to return to the machine and do the next 4 machine steps, stitching the text and the eraser and chalk. Now that the design elements have finished stitching, it's time to remove the hoop from the machine and position the backing fabric on the back side of the hoop. Before we secure the backing, a couple things to note. First of all, I noticed that I've got a little area of batting here that's kind of sticking out, so if you didn't do a super good job trimming your batting, this is a time where you can clean that up. Also, there may be a few jump stitches that need to be trimmed, and so you can use something like these little snip-a-stitch to loop underneath and grab that stitch and cut your little jumps before you move on. Once you've done that, you finish cleaning everything up, then it's time to add the backing. So we're going to turn it, here's our hoop, we're going to turn it to the back side, and then we're going to lay our backing fabric right side up over the shape, making sure that we're covering all the perimeter of the design. And then use some tape. I've got some painter's tape here that I'm going to tape my 4 corners so that it stays in position and doesn't flop over as I return to my machine. So then we will turn the hoop right side up and return to our machine to stitch the tack down step. Once you have your hoop attached to your machine, double check, like by peeking underneath, and make sure that all 4 corners of the fabric are where they're supposed to be, that it didn't fold over on itself before running the tack down step. Now I changed thread back to black. Again, this technically doesn't matter what color thread you use, but I typically choose a thread that matches my fabric. So we're going to stitch the tack down step, and then I'll see you at my cutting counter. We need to turn our hoop to the back side, remove the tape that may still be in place, and then trim the backing fabric again along the edges as close as you can to that tack down line. And this is easier to see because I had white bobbin thread. The last thing I'm going to do is just kind of scan the perimeter and cut any little threads that are sticking out, because we don't want those to show in our final product. So any of the knots or stray threads, and then we're ready to go back to our machine. The final step of the design is to stitch the satin stitches around the edge. And so again, if you want to have matching bobbin thread, this is the time where you would replace the bobbin. For this sample, I'm going to go ahead and stick with my white bobbin thread. The first thing that's going to stitch is a satin stitch along the bottom that's like the chalk rail where the chalk and the eraser sit, and then it will be the satin stitches around the final edge. And with that, the design is finished. Our last step is to remove the stabilizer. Now that the design has finished stitching, first thing I'm going to do is flip it to the back side and trim any of the remaining threads from when it cut my final knots. Then we can go ahead and remove this from the hoop. To remove the stabilizer, the first thing I'm going to do is cut away the excess stabilizer. I want to cut as close as I can to the satin stitches, but not too close because I don't want to accidentally snip any of those stitches. If you snip it, then it will start to unravel and really mess up your final project. Once that's been removed, what we can do is use a Q-tip that's saturated with water to rub along the edges and dissolve what's left behind. You can also stand at the sink and just dip your finger in the water and run your finger along it. One other tip that I have, when my kids were little, they had aquadoodle sets, and we still have one of the aquadoodle pens, and these are great for removing water-soluble stabilizer because it has a water tank in it already, and you can use the edge to just rub alongside the satin stitches. Okay, so you'll want to do that all along the edges. You don't have to get it super wet, just enough to cause this to dissolve. Now that the water-soluble stabilizer has been removed, our World's Best Teacher mug rug is complete. Let's talk about the back side real quick. This is the sample that I just stitched where I used regular white bobbin thread in my bobbin. This is a sample where I loaded this color thread in my bobbin, and you'll see the difference. Now, honestly, I typically don't bother changing my bobbin thread for something that's intended to be laying flat on a table and you don't see the back side. However, if you prefer a more polished look, then using coordinating thread in the bobbin is your best bet. One other fun design idea. Instead of making a mug rug, you could make a little wall hanging. What I did was, before tacking down the material on the back, I taped down a piece of ribbon in place and then laid the backing on top, and when it was stitched, I ended up with a little hanger, and that could be hung on the wall. Even though we've removed the water-soluble stabilizer from the edges, the reality is there's still a layer of stabilizer inside, and if this gets wet because of condensation from a cup, then it's possible that the stabilizer inside would start to dissolve and may create a sticky mess. So I would recommend actually submerging the mug rug in a bowl of warm water. You don't need to use hot water. You don't want to risk your fabrics running. Just let it soak in a bowl of warm water for a little while. And then once it's done, you will remove it and set it on a towel dry, smoothing out the edges. And when it's all done, give it a quick little press, and then you won't have to worry about gummy stabilizer, especially if you're giving this as a gift. Whether you use black fabric or green fabric, or you use a vinyl and make a little wall hanging instead of a mug rug, there's lots of fun options, and we can't wait to see what you create. Be sure to share your pictures in our Facebook group. Thank you for watching. Check out our other videos for more helpful tips.